just as conservative. Tom Roller, he's our SREC representative. SREC is the state executive committee. He spent 30 years developing the party in Potter County and has done a fantastic job. And the other person we have here that I want to recognize is PJ Lemons. And she's our volunteer coordinator and runs our local county offices in Potter and Randall both share an office over on 2217 21st Street. And it's kind of the quasar Ted Cruz headquarters for this area. We also plan on having a large Republican presence in the Tri-State Fair. If you don't want to get involved, please get a hold of Terry or PJ or myself. We want everybody that is here to be with us. Make it a large presence. We'll also have a booth at the fair, handing out Ted Cruz campaign paraphernalia and other candidates, and we need help manning that booth. So if you want to Terry or PJ, we'll get you signed up and get you. Okay. Sorry about that. Now let's get to why we're here. We're here to listen to our United States Senator and support him. Why do we support him? We support him because he shares our values and is one of us. He is a Texan. He was born, he was raised, he grew up in, and he had a distinguished law career in Texas. He was married in and has raised 2 lovely daughters in Texas. And he still lives in Texas. He has never succumbed to the temptation to move to that low, humid, Democrat, liberal, media-infested, corruption-filled swamp by Washington, D.C. Rather, he lives with us in Texas. We Republicans on the High Plains understand how important it is to stay on higher ground. Our senator understands that too, and he stayed on higher ground, Texas. Our senator understands the dangers of that evil swamp. He's never joined it like so many do. In fact, our senator is leading the fight and helping our president drain that swamp. Fellow Republicans, it is with great pride and honor that I introduce to you our current and future United States Senator from Texas, Ted Cruz.
God bless Texas. Dan, thank you for that kind introduction, that kind welcome. Thank you everyone for coming out today. Thank you for being here. It is a pleasure to be back in Amarillo. It is a pleasure to be back in the Panhandle. Thank you for standing up and fighting every day to defend our liberty. These are remarkable times. Anything is possible. As proof of that, I point to the fact that just a few weeks ago, I found myself playing one-on-one basketball with Jimmy Kimmel. Now, for those of y'all wondering how on earth that came to be, let me give you a little bit of the backstory. I am a die-hard Houston Rockets fan. And our Houston Rockets were inches away from winning the Western Conference Finals and came up just short. The next day, Jimmy Kimmel went on national television and began making fun of us. And in particular, he blamed the Rockets' loss on me. He said the reason the Rockets lost is because Ted was at Game 7 and he cursed the Rockets. Well, I got kind of annoyed at that. And I figured, all right, I can either get ticked off or I can have some fun with it. So I pulled out my phone, I sent a tweet. I said, all right, big guy, you talk a good game. How about we settle this man-to-man, hoops, one-on-one. The loser gives $5,000 to the charity of the winner's choice. Well, next thing you know, Jimmy said yes. He got on a plane, he flew to Houston. We played at TSU, Texas Southern University. Over 6,000 people came out to watch the game. As I said that day, never before have so many people gathered to watch so little talent in basketball. The entire week before, Jimmy went on national television every night talking smack, guaranteeing victory. He said it was physically impossible that he would lose this game. Well, the day of the game came, and I got to tell you, it was ugly. There must have been 1,000 fouls in the course of that game. ESPN later broadcast, if Dr. Naismith had seen what happened here today, he'd have invented a different sport. But at the end of the day, the final score was Cruz 11, Kimmel 9. And even better than that, we raised over $80,000 for 2 wonderful Texas charities. So anything is possible. If you look nationally at where we are, we've got a Republican president, we have Republican majorities in both houses of Congress, and we are winning big, big victories for the American people. We started last year with 4 big domestic priorities: tax cuts, regulatory reform, Obamacare, and judges. My view was if we could deliver on those 4, it would have a long-lasting, a powerful impact on Texans throughout our state. As we stand here a year and a half into it, it is remarkable just how many of those priorities we've delivered on. In December of last year on tax cuts, we passed the biggest tax cut in a generation. We cut taxes on small businesses, on farmers, on ranchers. We cut taxes on Texas families. We doubled the exemption from the death tax, which means 2/3 of the farmers and ranchers and small businesses that would have paid the death tax are now exempt. We doubled the child tax credit from $1,000 per child per year to $2,000 per child per year, which is real money in the pockets of hardworking Texas families. We doubled the standard deduction, which means starting next year, 90% of Americans will fill out your taxes on a postcard. Now, personally, I think that should be 100%. And we should adopt a simple flat tax and abolish the IRS. But 90% is a very good start.
Yes, sir.
Second big priority, regulatory reform. It's been one of the great successes of the last 2 years. Just about every cabinet agency, just about every cabinet secretary, pulling back the job-killing regulations that were hammering Texas, that were hammering oil and gas, that were hammering farmers and ranchers and ag. And the result is the Texas economy is booming. Oil production in the state of Texas is up 33% from 2016. We repealed the Waters of the United States rule, which would have hammered farmers and ranchers and put the EPA in charge of every puddle and ditch on your land. And nationally, we have the lowest unemployment in decades. We have the lowest African American unemployment that has ever been recorded since we began keeping the data. We have the lowest Hispanic unemployment that has ever been recorded since we began keeping the data. And for young people, we got a lot of young people here today, we have the lowest youth unemployment, ages 16 to 24, in 52 years. It's real simple. When you cut taxes, when you simplify the tax code, when you pull back job-killing regulations, small businesses prosper and the state of Texas does great. Third big priority, Obamacare. Clearly the biggest unfinished commitment of our Republican majorities. But it is worth noting that we did manage to come together and repeal the Obamacare individual mandate. That's a big deal. I led the fight to make that happen. And last fall, practically nobody thought we could get it done. We had maybe 6 or 7 senators supporting the effort, and then by December, we brought everyone together, got all 52 Republicans on the same page, and we delivered on our promise to repeal the individual mandate. Now, we need to finish the job and repeal the rest of that disastrous law. And finally, judges. Judges have been an unmitigated success of the Trump presidency and the Republican majority in the Senate. We have Justice Neil Gorsuch. And we're fixing to have Justice Brett Kavanaugh. If you see Chuck Schumer running around on the Senate floor with his hair on fire, that'd be why. But not only that, we've confirmed principled constitutionalists up and down the federal bench. Last year, we confirmed more federal Court of Appeals judges than any time in history in the first year of a president's term. And for all of us who value the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, who care about free speech and religious liberty, who care about the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms, who care about the 10th Amendment, it is the courts that are at the crossroads between either undermining those rights or protecting those rights. And in the last year and a half, we have seen tremendous victories protecting the constitutional rights of all 28 million Texans. We're now in election season. It is 69 days until Election Day. And we got a fight on our hands. The extreme left, they're angry. They're energized. They're filled with hatred for the president. And let me tell you right now, that is dangerous. We underestimate that anger at our peril. It's resulting in two things. Number one, tens of millions of dollars flooding into the state of Texas. Liberals all over the country who desperately want to turn Texas blue. But number two, it means we're going to see in November record-setting Democratic turnout. Now here's the good news. This is Texas. And in Texas, there are a whole lot more conservatives than there are liberals. Our biggest challenge is complacency. I don't think there's a risk of a bunch of Texas conservatives waking up suddenly and voting Democrat. But there is a chance that too many of us stay home. That we don't feel the same urgency as those on the extreme left that are going after the president. And all it takes is just a few of us staying home to see what we have here in Texas slip away. What do we believe in Texas? As Texans, we believe in basic common sense principles. We believe in low taxes, low regulations, lots and lots of jobs, higher wages, more opportunity. We believe in securing the border and keeping this nation safe. And we believe in defending the Constitution and Bill of Rights. If we show up, if we turn out freedom-loving Texans, then together, we're going to keep Texas bright, bright red. And with that, happy to answer any questions you like. Yes, ma'am. All right, I thought the first half of the question was going one way and then it changed. So her question, for those of y'all who couldn't hear it, was, when are we going to build a wall between Texas and California? And I'll confess, I understand that sentiment. Now, I'm married a native Californian. You know, there's a joke I tell that my darling bride doesn't like it when I tell, which is, what's the difference between California and the Titanic? Answer, the passengers of the Titanic didn't vote to hit the iceberg. But you know, look, that question reveals something right at the heart of this election. If you look at national liberals, they want to turn Texas into California. That's a crystal ball. That's what they want Texas to look like. And listen, let me say something. One of the beauties of the United States, one of the beauties of the 10th Amendment and federalism, is we got 50 states with wide diversity, and that is wonderful. Nobody would expect California to adopt the same laws as Texas. And nobody should expect us to adopt the same laws as they do. And you can vote with your feet. Now, I'll tell you something. There are 1,000 people a day moving to the state of Texas. And it's not rocket science. Texas is where the jobs are. One of my favorite statistics. The cost of a one-way U-Haul from California to Texas is more than 300% the cost of a U-Haul going the other way around. Now, for those on the far left, they have no idea why that might be the case. But as Texans, we understand the free market. And so I will say, listen, there are a lot of Californians and folks from New York and Connecticut and all over who are coming to Texas because they want to be free. And I welcome everyone as refugees for freedom. But I have suggested that as Californians are coming in, that we stop them and have an entrance exam. Do you understand that high taxes and high regulations destroy jobs? If no, turn the heck around and go back to the place you came from. If those nutty policies have already destroyed the economy in one place, don't come here and mess up what we have. And that's what this election is about, is preserving what we know works in Texas, what has made Texas so free and so extraordinary. Yes.
Sir, where you were straight out, you're going to get a full Attorney General.
Well, thank you for that question very much. I'll tell you, at least for me, I can't speak for Trey, but at least for me, I am very happy where I am right now in the Senate, because I think the Senate is the battleground for just about every major issue we've got in this country. Part of your question, though, I understand where it's coming from, is that, like you, I'm frustrated with the Department of Justice. And I'm frustrated with the FBI. One of the worst legacies of the Obama presidency is the deep politicization of the Department of Justice and the FBI. Both of those institutions have long institutions, decades long or even century long records of being apolitical, of staying out of politics and simply enforcing the law. Under Eric Holder and Loretta Lynch, we saw them turned into arms of the Democratic National Party. We saw the IRS targeting and persecuting American citizens for just expressing their First Amendment rights, for being perceived to be political opponents of the president. That is wrong. It is an abuse of power. And by the way, it was wrong when Richard Nixon tried to do it. Now, interestingly enough, when Richard Nixon tried to do it, the IRS told him, no, we're not going to do it. When the Obama administration tried to do it, the IRS and the Department of Justice, they were eager to help. That politicization, sadly, has filtered into what's called the deep state. And you've got far too many partisan Democrats now at senior roles in law enforcement. And let me be clear, I don't want a Republican Department of Justice. I don't want a Republican FBI. I want a Department of Justice and FBI that follows the law and is faithful to the Constitution regardless of the party.
Down the road, in your heart of hearts, you never consider being a nominee for the Supreme Court. There are very few people that are as strong constitutionalists as you. And I'm concerned that down the road that we need another strong constitution from this court.
Well, sir, thank you for that very, very kind question. I will say it is humbling to be even discussed in those circles. I'll be candid with you. Serving on the Supreme Court is not the desire of my heart. I have had this conversation very directly with the President on multiple times. And I'll tell you the reason why, because that surprises some people. The reason why is that a principled federal judge stays out of political fights, stays out of policy fights. If I were ever a judge, that's what I'd do. I don't want to stay out of political and policy fights. You look at all the issues we talked about. The Senate is the battleground. We're 51-49, and I think we desperately need strong conservatives fighting for lower taxes, less regulation, fighting to secure the border, fighting to rebuild our military, fighting to stand with Israel, fighting to stand up to North Korea and Iran. I think there are so many battles that I believe I can have a greater impact standing up for Texas in the Senate. Now, the court is immensely important. I would like to be deeply involved with confirming 2, 3, 4, 5 principled constitutionalists to the court, I just don't particularly want me to be one of them. So, but thank you, sir. Yes. So it's a great question. She asked about the president's proposal to create another branch of the military, a Space Force, and she asked how that's going. I'll tell you, I agree with the president on this. I think this is a good idea. It's an idea that I had been talking about in the Senate for some time. And let me tell you why. Let me step back a little bit and talk about space, because space has been a particular priority and focus of mine. So in the Senate, I am the chairman of the Science and Space Subcommittee of the Senate Commerce Committee. I've chaired that for 4 years. And I also serve on the Senate Armed Services Committee. And so I've been deeply involved in both the civilian and commercial aspects of space, but also in the military and defense aspects of space. And in the past 6 years, I've been able to pass 3 major pieces of legislation directly concerning space. One was in 2015, the Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act. Now what that did, that protected property rights in space, that continued the regulatory moratorium on commercial space. You know, Texas has tens of thousands of jobs that come from the commercial space sector. And that keeps growing and growing and growing. Now the Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act, I got the support of Democrats, of Republicans in the Senate. In the House, it passed both houses of Congress, and President Obama signed it into law. Then 2 years later, in 2017, I authored the NASA Authorization Act of 2017. It was the first NASA authorization in 7 years. And that, likewise, that did a number of things. One of the things it did, it extended the International Space Station until 2024. It directed NASA to study extending it until 2028. It also laid out a clear and distinct mission for NASA, for our entire manned space exploration program, which is we are going to Mars. And the first boot that lands on the surface of Mars will be an American boot. That is a mission that we've got. Yeah, we're glad to go to Mars. That's a mission that helps focus, that helps direct the entire focus of what NASA is doing to develop the technology, to develop the training, to bring American astronauts to Mars, to continue exploration and discovery. That legislation, we got Democrats and Republicans on board. It passed both houses of Congress as bipartisan legislation, and President Trump signed it into law. Now, if you stop and think for a minute, in this deeply polarized time, with massive divisions between the parties, there are very few examples of anyone passing major substantive legislation in an area, one of which was signed by Obama and one of which was signed by Trump. That's an example, I think, of the bipartisan agreement we've been able to bring together on space. And then the third major piece of legislation focuses on the military side. Those two were civilian and commercial. On the military side, this year, in fact, just a couple of weeks ago, as part of the National Defense Authorization Act, there were a bunch of amendments that I included in that act that were passed into law. One of the most important was an amendment that directed the Defense Department to develop and implement a space-based missile interceptor test bed to intercept missiles, to intercept ICBMs from North Korea or from Iran. And this is the first time DOD has ever been directed to implement space-based interceptors. And let me explain for a second why that's so important. Right now, we have the capability to intercept missiles as they come back into the atmosphere, as they're getting ready to land or detonate. There are a lot of disadvantages to that. It is much, much better to intercept the missile in what's called the boost phase, when it's taking off. Now, the advantages are, number one, in the boost phase, it's moving much, much more slowly. It starts at 0, and it goes slowly when it's taken off. When it's entering, it's moving really fast. It's much harder to hit. There's a much greater chance of missing. When it's moving slowly, that's when you want to take it out. Secondly, it can't deploy countermeasures when it's taken off. While the missile is launching, countermeasures don't work. They can work when they're coming back in. Thirdly, it can't deploy into multiple warheads. When it's coming in, if it splits into multiple warheads, you got to get each and every one of them. But fourth, if it is a missile with nuclear weaponry, with biological or chemical weaponry, then we would much rather detonate it over the country that is firing the missile, rather than detonate it over the United States that's a target. And as you know, this question of missile defense has been vigorously debated for decades. This is an amendment I was proud on the Senate Armed Services Committee to get the support of Republicans and Democrats. Several Democrats supported me in this amendment, which is the first time we've seen that kind of major positive step. And the reason for all of this, and the reason that the President rolled out a Space Force, is the theater of space is getting increasingly weaponized. Now, there are some folks who say, look, we don't want to see warfare in space. That might be nice. Look, I like that theoretically, but it doesn't matter what we want. Our adversaries are taking warfare to space. The Chinese have already demonstrated they have the technology to launch a missile and destroy a satellite in orbit. And that, you've got the danger of an EMP, of detonating a nuclear weapon in the atmosphere, which could take down much of our electrical grid. Space is becoming the new theater. And on the Senate Armed Services Committee all the time, I ask our military leaders, I say, how often are you training in a space-down environment? You're the captain of an aircraft carrier. Do you know how to pilot the ship using a compass and the stars? What do you do if GPS goes down? What do you do if all the technology goes down? What do you do if all your comms, everything's going through a satellite? If those satellites go down, an F-35, I've got the chance to fly in an F-35 simulator, not a real F-35, but a simulator, which was amazing. But what do you do in the F-35? Are our fighter pilots prepared if suddenly their GPS disappears? Can they find their way home? If they're targeting, we have enormous advantage in technology in terms of targeting if all of that goes down. And so the advantage of the Space Force, I think we need to be doing much, much more to harden our architecture in space so that our communications, our financial satellites, our commercial satellites are not as vulnerable to aggression from China, from Russia, from North Korea, from Iran, from anyone who would be an adversary. And also to develop offensive capability. Part of the way you prevent a foreign country taking out our satellites is having the ability to take out their satellites, and that deterrent force. And so the reason I support President Trump's Space Force is, I think, elevating an additional branch of the military. Most of this right now is within the Air Force. Elevating it to its own branch, I think, will heighten the attention, heighten the focus, increase the resources, and I think that's very needed. Now let me make one final point. I have made a repeated and explicit request that I want to be notified the day that James Tiberius Kirk signs up in Space Force. Yes, ma'am.
Our farmers and ranchers are seeing some of the lowest income margins that have trended since the 1980s. Are there any legislation that's coming down the pipeline that might help mitigate some of these losses? I'd also like to touch on that the availability of credit for beginning and minority type farmers is getting harder and harder to obtain through the Farm Service Agency.
Right.
Do you have any insight on how we might simplify that service to get to beginning and minority farmers in advance?
So it's a great question. Look, you are right. It is tough to be a farmer. It is tough to be a rancher. You face uncertainty every day. You face weather. You face insects and pestilence. You face another pestilence coming from Washington. I mean, it is tough. It's unpredictable. You invest your whole life savings every year in the crop and hope that it doesn't go south. And if you look at our farmers and ranchers, ag is a fundamental backbone of the Texas economy. We provide food and fiber for the entire country and for the entire world. And I've worked hard in the Senate to be a champion for Texas farmers and Texas ranchers. There are a lot of different elements of that. I talked about a couple of them during my remarks. One was doubling the exemption from the death tax. That's a big, big deal for a lot of the farmers and ranchers who are forced to sell their farms or ranch when the patriarch or matriarch passes away and the next generation gets it. Doubling the exemption means 2/3 of the farms and ranches that would have been subject to that are now totally exempt. Another major example is the Waters of the United States rule, where the Obama administration was trying to dramatically expand the EPA's regulatory authority, to put the EPA in charge of any puddle, any ditch, and call that navigable waters. And you know, you look at the word navigable, I'm reminded of a line from my favorite movie, The Princess Bride. You keep on using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. So the Trump administration early on stepped in and pulled that back. That was exactly the right thing to do. We've also seen a lot of direct focus on ag, for example, in Harvey. Harvey struck and did a lot of damage. To cotton down in South Texas, did a lot of damage to livestock, and we included very substantial relief for those farmers and ranchers that were injured by Harvey within the Harvey relief bills that I helped champion in the Senate. Beyond that, we've got a farm bill that's moving through the Senate. It's passed the Senate. We've got another farm bill in the House. My hope is we'll go to conference committee and get it passed. It's in conference committee right now, but my hope is we will get the farm bill out of conference committee and pass it into law. I will say one of the most important fixes that we included in the Harvey disaster bills was the seed cotton fix to treat cotton seed fairly, treat cotton fairly with other crops. There's no reason cotton should be discriminated against. It wasn't fair. And that was something I fought hard for, and we had a big victory for cotton farmers who've had a tough run of it. So it's always going to be up and down in the world of ag. That's the nature of it. I remember when I was first running for Senate in 2012, the first 3 times I came out to Lubbock, all 3 times I landed in Lubbock, it rained. And I joked I was going to change my campaign slogan to vote for Ted, he'll bring the rain. And I said, heck, if I could deliver on that promise, I'd win by acclamation. They'd cancel the whole election. But sadly, I cannot. Although I will tell you as a final aside, I was talking with some national security folks who were explaining some of the kind of lies and propaganda that radical Islamic terrorists use to attack Israel. And one of the lies and propaganda they say, I believe this is in Egypt, they say the Israelis have technology to steal the rain from Egypt and to take it to Israel. And my reaction is, I said, well, I'm a little skeptical, but I gotta say I'm also kind of mad, because if the Israelis got that technology, they need to give it to us now so we can bring it out to West Texas and bring the rain out here.
We already have control of the
Yes, ma'am.
My question is kind of twofold. I'm a mom, I have 4 boys, and from high school down to elementary school. What are your thoughts and ideas on how to best protect our schools and
Yes.
protect our children?
Yes.
And the other half of my question is, how can we change the dialogue away from guns are bad and it's a gun issue, where it's a mental health issue that we need to address in our schools?
It's a very good question. How old are your kids, your 4 kids?
14, 11, 9, and 5.
Awesome. Boys, girls, what's the name? All boys. So you got a lot of peace and quiet at home?
No, I doubt it.
Well, Heidi and I have 2 little girls, age 7 and 10. So those are wonderful, wonderful, fun ages. Listen, the question you ask is a question a lot of us worry about and are concerned about, particularly parents or grandparents of young kids. This is the time of year when the kids are all going back to school. And every one of us has seen headline after headline after headline of this insanity of these school shootings. And let me say, first of all, something is deeply messed up. I mean, I've been to too many of these. When we were growing up, this wasn't a thing. Look, maybe you worried about going to school and getting a black eye or a bloody nose. Or that. But you didn't worry about some lunatic coming in and trying to murder everyone. I mean, that just wasn't part of growing up. That wasn't part of school. And there are all sorts of factors that have led to this that are totally aside from laws and legislation. Factors like removing God from the public square. Like losing many of our moral foundations, losing a lot of the fabric that ties communities together, that ties families together. You see these murderers, many of them are young, isolated, alienated, striking out and angry. And there's no doubt that a lot of that can be helped by strengthening the ties of church and community and family that used to bind us all together, but that have been stretched almost to the breaking point. All of that being said, there is a lot more we can do to make schools safer that we need to do. So Santa Fe High School is about a half hour away from my house. I was at home the morning that Santa Fe shooting. Happened 7:30 in the morning, and I just got in the truck and headed down. And I spent the entire day down at Santa Fe High School the day of the shooting. The entire day with students, with parents, with first responders, with teachers. I remember that afternoon. I was in the hospital visiting a number of the students who'd been shot. Was in the room of one young man. He'd been shot twice, once in the hip, once through the elbow, just come out of surgery. There were probably a dozen of his classmates in that hospital room, along with friends and family. And I was there, the governor was there too, and you know, anytime you're visiting someone in the wake of a tragedy, you don't come in and give a political speech. You just come and listen, you just love on them. And so we both asked, we just said, you know, what's the answer? What do we do to fix this? It was striking. Of the dozen or so students in that hospital room, just about every one of them said, number one, they said, the answer is not gun control. And they said, look, if you take our guns away, it's not going to make us any safer. It's just going to mean that the killers and criminals are the only ones that have guns. So we said, all right, what can you do? The number one answer that they said, and that came out of the roundtables we did with families, with parents, with teachers, the number one thing we can do to make our schools safer is put more armed police officers on campuses to keep our schools safe. The number one thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. In that same hospital room, I remember there was a kid standing behind me who said he was in the classroom adjoining where the shooting happened. The shooting happened in the art annex in the back of the high school. He was in the classroom next door. And he said, you know, my teacher was a former Marine. If he'd have been armed, he could have stopped this before anybody was killed. And I think a natural common sense step is to allow teachers who are trained, who are competent, who know what they're doing, to keep and bear arms and help keep schools safe. Now the media loves to try to exploit this issue. And they love to paint the picture of little old Mrs. Smith in her 80s in a walker, and somebody forcing a .44 Magnum into her hand against her will. Now I was using this example in East Texas a couple of weeks ago, and in the back of the room was a Mrs. Smith with her walker, and she said, I'll take it and I'll hit what I'm aiming at. So this is Texas. But listen, nobody is talking about forcing teachers who don't feel prepared to carry firearms, but there are a lot of teachers who are former military, who are former law enforcement, who are trained, who are perfectly capable to help keep kids safe. So I think that's a common sense step. I also think there's a lot we can do in terms of physical infrastructure. For example, shrinking the number of entrances to a school. You know, if you go to a courthouse, you go to a bank, you go to most places of business, typically they have 1 or 2 entrances. They don't have 20 or 30 or 40. You know, Santa Fe, the shooter went in a back entrance at the art annex. The value of shrinking the number of entrances is that you bring any potential assailant past the law enforcement so that they can intercept them at the door before they can get to the kids. There are other steps, like installing metal detectors where it makes sense, where it's appropriate, where the local school district thinks it's needed. I'll tell you another step is hardening the doors so that bullets can't travel through them. In both Parkland and in Santa Fe, students were killed because in Santa Fe there was one student who was leaning against the door trying to hold the door shut to keep the killer out in the hallway. And the killer stepped back, fired through the door, shot through the door, and killed that young man. I visited with that young man's parents. It is tragic, and those doors are flimsy little things that you can shoot through. It's not that expensive to have doors that a bullet can't travel through, which means that kids can be safe if you can lock the door and have a bulletproof door, and they can be safe and away from an assailant. So there are lots and lots of steps we can do. I can tell you in 2013, my first year in the Senate, I introduced legislation that would have provided $300 million for school safety funding, and Harry Reid, the Democrats, filibustered it. They blocked it. And just a week ago, on an appropriations bill, I introduced an amendment that would have allowed federal funds going to education to be used specifically for school safety, used specifically to hire more police officers, to put in metal detectors, to put in bulletproof doors. Once again, the Democrats blocked it. Because nationally what you see is people playing politics with this. That the Democratic focus over and over again, whenever there's a shooting, is target the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens. That doesn't work, and we need to instead focus on the bad guys and keep our students safe. We'll do 2 more questions.
When's your debate?
Okay, great question. When's the debate? So, short answer is, I don't know when there will be a debate. Over a month ago, I invited Beto O'Rourke to participate in 5 debates all over the state. In Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, McAllen, Lubbock. Divided between on topics, on taxes and regulations and jobs and the economy.
He don't know.
On immigration and border security and the Supreme Court and constitutional rights. On energy and trade. On national security and foreign policy. And on Obamacare. 5 debates would be the most debates that has ever happened in a U.S. Senate race in the state of Texas. Normally, incumbent office holders don't want to do that. Normally, sitting office holders are reluctant to debate, often avoid doing debates at all. I'll tell you the reason I proposed 5 is I think we owe it to the voters of Texas.
Yeah.
There is a dramatic difference between my record and Congressman O'Rourke's record. There is a dramatic difference between our policy positions. And by the way, our friends in the media will never talk about any of that. So the debates are important for laying out what path makes sense. So the first debate was supposed to be Friday, day after tomorrow, in Dallas. I had accepted the offer. It was going to be hosted by the Dallas Morning News and NBC. Hardly bastions of right-wing conservatism. So I accepted the debate, and we found out just this week, Beto said no. He would not show up. He won't participate in the debate. He's not willing to come this Friday. So there's not going to be a debate on Friday.
Tell the state that, Senator. Tell the state he refused.
We are telling them, and I'm hoping our friends in the media and the cameras there are helping that, but we are telling folks, so he refused to show up. By the way, I'm still willing to show up on Friday. Dallas Morning News and NBC are still willing to host it, but Beto is still not willing to host. Now, he sent his staff. They've been emailing back and forth with my staff. Maybe they'll agree to a debate. It sure seems like he doesn't want a debate. Parameters baloney. This was NBC and the Dallas Morning News. Do you really think that's going into Sean Hannity? It's the Dallas Morning News. And that's his complaint. Oh, well, I don't like that Ted suggested having a podium at one of the debates. Ooh, a scary podium. How about just let's talk about the issues?
That's right.
And let's talk about the differences between our records. All right. Final
Get
question.
him.
Over there.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Empty. The injunction? I have to say, I'm kind of surprised that she didn't show up. Ginger? Yeah.
I'm happy to take the materials and we'll certainly look at them. Let me say a couple of things in response to that. Number one, I understand your frustration, and I understand the battles that occur in this community and every community over questions of where to spend tax dollars, what's the right level, what's the right level of taxes, what's the right level of public expenditure. So let me first of all say, thank you for being engaged. Thank you for holding your elected officials accountable. Thank you for speaking up and fighting for what you believe in. And I would say that, by the way, to all the folks here who are engaged on any sorts of issues, issues on one side or the other, thank you for being engaged. That's how our democratic process works. Let me give you a couple of observations. Number one, I'm a big believer in the Constitution and the 10th Amendment. At the heart of the 10th Amendment is that the federal government should do only those things the federal government should do. We should defend the nation. We should focus on critical infrastructure needs. We should focus on keeping this country safe. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution enumerates the responsibilities, the powers of Congress. What the 10th Amendment says is that those powers that are not given to the federal government are reserved to the states and to the people. And so on questions like whether to build a ballpark, look, people can disagree on that. People in good faith on both sides of that issue can disagree, and you can argue back and forth. My view is, serving in the Senate, it's not my place to stick my nose in that dispute. That I've got faith in the people of Amarillo to work it out. And you don't need someone. I live in Houston. Personally, it doesn't have a stake. I can be involved in a Houston issue, but if the people of Amarillo ought to decide that issue here. And I take that approach on a whole host of issues, which is that the people that should be resolving it are your local elected officials and your state legislature. Look, some of those issues are state issues, and so you can fight them out in Austin. That's why we elect them and have those arguments, and I think that's perfectly appropriate. But let me finish with a plea. All of these battles are heartfelt. They're sometimes bare knuckle. The danger we have politically is that if all of us who are on generally the Republican side of things, if we let those divisions, those disagreements, lower our enthusiasm and keep us home in November, we can lose the entire state. Republican State Convention this year, there was a vigorous battle for state party chairman. And it was hard fought. It was passionate on both sides. That's fine. That's the democratic process. People were fighting for the candidate they wanted to win. One candidate won, one didn't. I took my chance addressing the convention to give a plea to unity. To say, listen, even if your candidate didn't prevail, we need to come together for November. Because it doesn't take too many of us mad at one thing or another who take our marbles and go home to suddenly lose the state. And let me use this question as an opportunity just to give some observations about this race altogether. Typically, in a general election in Texas, Democrats at least pretend to go to the middle, at least pretend to be moderates. That is not happening in this race. Congressman Beto O'Rourke, my opponent, is running hard left, like Bernie Sanders. So let me give you some specifics to back that up. On taxes, he voted against the tax cut, and he is promising to raise your taxes. By the way, he's also voted in favor of a carbon tax, and he's voted in favor of a $10 a barrel tax on oil. He likes those taxes. On government regulations, he wants to bring back the Obama-era regulations that hammered Texas, that hammered oil and gas, that hammered farmers and ranchers. Congressman O'Rourke is a big supporter of the Paris climate deal. The Paris climate deal was terrible for Texas. I encouraged President Trump to pull out of it, and he did pull out. On health care, Congressman O'Rourke supports Obamacare and wants to expand it to full-on socialized medicine, putting the federal government in charge of your health care and your doctor. Okay, this is funny. We have a heckler who just screams lie. But you know, the interesting thing is you can go and you can look at Beto O'Rourke's own website where he calls for single-payer, government-controlled health care. That's it. So I'm not going to have a debate with you. You can heckle, but I'm not going to have a debate with you. Thank you. But thank you for being here. I appreciate your coming. Appreciate your coming again. On the Second Amendment.
Come and take it.
On the Second Amendment. Okay, all right. You
Oh, wow.
to the entire election on the Second Amendment.
Oh, my goodness.
Come and take it, and the Beto O'Rourke supporter screams, "Oh, we will."
No.
They want to sum this entire election up. That's their approach. They want to come and take it, and the question is Texas going to stand up and defend our freedom? That this young man is accurately representing Congressman O'Rourke's position. Congressman O'Rourke has tweeted out to the world how proud he is that he has an F rating from the NRA. Not a D minus, not a D, an F. And he's campaigning on that. That's a major reason he says you should vote for him, is that he has an F rating from the NRA. I'll tell you, I retweeted him. Look, elections are about choices. And if you want a big government, gun-grabbing liberal, well, the Democrats are giving you one.
Read the Federalist Papers.
On Israel, he has the most anti-Israel record. Okay, there's another example. Free Palestine is the Beto O'Rourke supporters' position.
There is no Palestine.
He has the most anti-Israel record of any Democratic Senate candidate in the country. And let me give you specifics, because facts matter. In 2014, when Hamas was raining rockets down on Israel, Congressman O'Rourke was one of eight members of the House to vote against funding Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system. Virtually every Republican voted yes. Virtually every Democrat voted yes. Nancy Pelosi voted yes. Maxine Waters voted yes.
What about
But
Loretta
Beto O'Rourke
Lynch?
voted no, and he refused to stand with Israel on that vote. On immigration, there is no race in the country on which there is a starker difference on immigration than the United States Senate race here in Texas. On my end, I'm incredibly honored to have received the formal endorsement of the National Border Patrol Council. That is the union of the men and women who protect our border. They usually stay out of politics. But the sector presidents, the union sector presidents from every sector along the Rio Grande, they all went to McAllen. They formally endorsed me because they said, out of all 100 senators, the one who is consistently leading the fight to secure the border, to build the wall, and to stand with the men and women of Border Patrol is Ted. On the flip side, Congressman O'Rourke opposes a wall. In In fact, he has said we have too many fences and walls on the border right now. We need to tear down the ones we already have. See, you say lie, but the funny thing is he said it looking into an iPhone on video so you could watch the video of him standing next to a wall saying we have too many walls on the border, tear them down. Facts matter, sir. Sanctuary cities. And he has said he is, quote, open to, and these are his words, open to abolishing ICE. ICE is the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency. When he was pressed on that, he doubled down and said, maybe we shouldn't just abolish ICE, maybe we should abolish the entire Department of Homeland Security. Look, those are radical and extreme positions. That's not in the mainstream. That's not. And in Texas, we are proud to stand with the men and women of ICE and Border Patrol and law enforcement and the people who protect us. You know, just this past week, Congressman O'Rourke and I have been having a disagreement. A disagreement over his position supporting the NFL players who refuse to stand for the national anthem, who protest the national anthem. Sir, I reckon, sir, okay, fine. Under your explanation, he's protesting police and law enforcement. That's fine, whatever you like. But let's talk about what the facts are. What the facts are is that Congressman O'Rourke was doing an event with a bunch of his supporters. And somebody stood up and asked him a question. He said, listen, I'm a veteran. I come from a family of veterans. And he said, do you find it disrespectful when NFL players take a knee, refuse to stand for the flag, refuse to stand for the national anthem? Do you think that's disrespectful to veterans and to our active duty military and to our law enforcement?
Yes.
And Congressman O'Rourke responded. He said, no, I don't think it's disrespectful. And he went on to say that he could think of nothing more American than taking a knee and protesting during the national anthem. Now I gotta tell you, I can think of a whole lot of things more American than that. Like how about all the soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines that risk their lives every day keeping us safe? So nationally, this thing went viral. Hollywood celebrities loved it. Ellen DeGeneres retweeted it. In fact, next week, because he was happy to side with the protesters against the national anthem, he's going on Ellen's show. So Hollywood celebrities are thrilled. But let me tell you, that exchange, I think, shows just how out of touch Congressman O'Rourke is with the people of Texas. In Texas, we show respect. We show respect for the flag and we stand for the flag. When the national anthem is being sung, we put our hand on what the military is doing. We honor our veterans, we honor our active duty military, and we honor our law enforcement. You know, the men and women of law enforcement who risk their lives to keep us safe, we honor them too. Now listen, everyone has a First Amendment right to protest. But you can protest. Actually, this young man's doing it here, and this is peaceable protest. It is his right, and I celebrate your First Amendment right to do so.
Amen.
You can protest in a way that is not disrespectful to our national anthem and to our veterans and to the people that fought and died for our freedom. And Congressman O'Rourke is the only Democratic nominee, Senate nominee in the country who has explicitly come out for impeaching President Trump. And he has said he would vote yes now today to impeach President Trump.
No evidence?
Evidence doesn't seem to be a factor. Look, the extreme left, it's a visceral hatred. They hate the president, and that's not good for our country. That kind of animosity, that kind of hatred, that kind of division is not good for our country. And by the way, what I encourage especially young people is when you see so much hatred and anger coming from the extreme left, Respond with a smile. Don't respond in kind. Be happy warriors. Be happy warriors because we're spreading the truth. The truth is low taxes, low regulation works. The truth is youth unemployment is the lowest it's been in 52 years. The truth is we're fighting for opportunity for everyone. Now, despite the fact that Congressman O'Rourke is running hard left, he is the #1 Democratic fundraiser in the country. And he is outraising our campaign substantially. Last quarter, our campaign raised $4.6 million, the most of any Republican senator. Same quarter, we raised $4.6 million. His campaign raised $10.4 million. That's more than twice as much, nearly 3 times as much. So that is dangerous. That kind of money, what it means is that we're being outspent dramatically. In the last 3 weeks, the O'Rourke campaign has run $1.3 million in statewide TV ads, 3 weeks in a row. So that's about $3.9 million in statewide TV in 3 weeks. In response to the $3.9 million, we have run
I don't have a TV. I ain't gotta see that stupid crap.
$3.9 million to 0. If you turn on your TVs, he's running ads right now. I'm not. It's not complicated why I'm not. Which is we don't have the money in the bank. If we start spending our money now, we're not going to have it come election day, and we need to have that money come election day. But that's an example of how dangerous that is when you've got over $1 million a week in TV ads coming up. This is a dangerous election. It's dangerous for the state of Texas. So I want to ask everyone here to do 4 things. Number 1, speak out. Use your voice and speak out why freedom matters to you, why low taxes and low regulations and lots of jobs matter, why it matters to secure the border and stop illegal immigration, why it matters to end sanctuary cities and not release violent criminal illegal aliens into our communities, why it matters to protect the Second Amendment and to protect all of our fundamental liberties. Particularly young people, use your voice on social media to speak out. It's powerful. Second thing I would ask, contribute. When you get home today, go to our website. It's tedcruz.org, tedcruz.org, tedcruz.org. Go to the website. Make a contribution. There we go. Make a contribution. We're being outraised more than 2 to 1. And let me mention to you, for those of y'all who have your checkbooks, write a check right here today. How many people do we have in the campaign that can take checks? Raise our hands. All right, we got Emily there, Wade, 1, 2. The other guys are out in the car. All right, 2 people right there who can take. Oh, Brian's waving in the back. All right, 1, 2, 3. By the way, I said that a couple of days ago. There were 3 guys back in the bar who said, I can take a check. I'm like, look, I know you might want a new bass boat, but we're not taking a collection for that. So if you have a checkbook, write a check today, and I'll tell you why it matters so much. Every penny that we raise is going to inform, to mobilize, to energize, and to turn out freedom-loving Texans. And we know the mainstream media is not going to do that job for us. Every other day, they write another glowing profile of Congressman O'Rourke. Their favorite adjective, by the way, is Kennedy-esque, usually with his hair blowing in the wind. And by the way, you will notice that all of these gauzy ads mention nothing about his policy positions, mention nothing about his record. He just has apparently good hair. That's the media's message. Oh gosh. That's what they're going to do. They're all in. Their hearts go pitter-patter when they see someone saying, yay, protesting the flag. Oh, nothing makes the media more excited. But that's not Texas. And so we've got to get my record and his record out and let the voters decide on substance and issues and what's the right path for our state. Number 3, volunteer. Sign up to knock on doors. Every week we've got thousands of people across the state knocking on doors. It is powerful when you look in the eyes of your neighbor and you say, this election matters. It matters to me. It matters to my family. If you'd rather stay inside in the air conditioning, we have an app you can download from our website where you can make phone calls from your living room, sitting on the couch, and it'll put you directly in touch with Texas voters, we need to turn. And then number 4. Number 4, vote. Show up and vote, and bring your friends, and bring your family, and bring your coworkers, and bring your neighbors. There are 50 states, but there's only one Texas. And our freedom, it's not going to defend itself.
Yes, sir.
It will take each of us. The common sense values in Texas: low taxes, low regulations, lots and lots of jobs, lots and lots of opportunity, young people getting more and more opportunities, securing the border and keeping our communities safe, and defending the Constitution and defending the Bill of Rights. Those are principles that the overwhelming majority of Republicans agree with, the overwhelming majority of independents agree with, the overwhelming majority of libertarians agree with, and even more and more Democrats in Texas agree with. When you see national Democratic parties and candidates like Beto O'Rourke saying things like, come and take it on your guns, we will. There are a whole lot of conservative Democrats and moderate Democrats who were saying this party has left me. I'll tell you, every event we do across the state, and we're barnstorming all over the state, I have Democrats come up to me and say, I've been a Democrat my whole life, but I'm with you now. And if we stand up and we defend common sense values, we defend what as Texans we believe. We want to be free, leave us alone, and protect our rights. If we defend that, Texas is and will remain the greatest state in the greatest country in the history of the world.